After the bloody suppression of the 1848 revolutions, Austria's Habsburg monarchy found itself standing atop a smoldering heap of resentment, distrust, and instability. The brutal force used to maintain the imperial status quo temporarily preserved the Habsburg grip on power, but it also radicalized nationalist movements, exacerbated ethnic divisions, and alienated much of the population. Though Austria appeared victorious on the surface, the costs of their victory were immense. The country's once mighty empire now stood as a fragile coalition of restless, oppressed peoples, with nationalism looming as a constant threat. Despite these underlying fractures, Austria embarked on a campaign to consolidate its power across the empire. The conservative forces in Vienna sought to shore up their rule, hoping to quash any future attempts at revolution. However, instead of enacting the structural reforms that could have eased tensions within the empire, Austria doubled down on its repressive tactics, relying even more heavily on censorship, surveillance, and military force. The state cracked down on political dissidents, nationalist agitators, and intellectuals who dared to challenge Habsburg authority. At the heart of Austria's repression was its policing apparatus, which had grown into one of the most formidable and feared surveillance systems in Europe. The Austrian secret police, bolstered by a vast network of spies and informants, kept a close watch on every corner of the empire. Nothing was too insignificant to escape the eye of the Habsburg regime. From the local taverns where people gathered to discuss politics, to the universities where ideas of reform and revolution simmered, Austria's police state ensured that even whispers of dissent were quashed before they could grow into something more dangerous. This atmosphere of repression was exacerbated by Austria's rigid adherence to absolutist rule. The monarchy believed that its power was divinely ordained and thus unassailable. The mere suggestion of sharing power with a people through constitutional means was seen as a direct threat to the emperor's authority. As a result, Austria remained one of the last great European powers to resist the wave of constitutionalism that was sweeping across the continent in the wake of 1848. In refusing to yield to popular demands for democratic reform, Austria alienated large swaths of its population, particularly the middle class and intellectual elites who had been at the forefront of the 1848 revolutions. However, the greatest threat to Austria's stability during this period was not the call for constitutional government, but the rise of nationalism, particularly among the empire's various subject peoples. The Habsburg monarchy ruled over a vast and diverse array of ethnic groups, each with its own unique identity, language, and history. Nationalism, which had played a central role in the 1848 revolutions, continued to grow in strength, particularly in Hungary, Italy, and among the Slavic populations of the Balkans. Hungary, which had briefly won its independence during the 1848 revolutions, remained the most restless and defiant region within the empire. The brutal repression of the Hungarian revolutionaries, including the execution of its leaders and the imposition of martial law, had failed to extinguish the desire for self-rule. The Hungarian people, emboldened by their revolutionary experience, continued to demand greater autonomy from Vienna. Though the Austrian government kept Hungary under tight military control, it was clear that the desire for independence had not been crushed. In Italy, where Austrian troops had crushed the revolutions of Lombardy and Venice, the spirit of Italian unification continued to burn brightly. Italian nationalists, led by figures like Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi, were determined to unite the various Italian states into a single nation free from foreign domination. Austria, which still held the northern Italian territories of Lombardy and Venetia, was seen as the primary obstacle to Italian unification. Though the revolutions of 1848 had failed to dislodge Austrian control, the Italian nationalist movement continued to grow, fueled by resentment of Austrian rule and a longing for national sovereignty. The Italian struggle for unification posed a serious challenge to Austrian dominance in the region. Throughout the 1850s and 1860s, Austria found itself increasingly isolated in its efforts to maintain control over its Italian territories. In 1859, Austria's position in Italy was dealt a devastating blow when it faced defeat in the Second Italian War of Independence. The combined forces of the Kingdom of Sardinia and France, under Napoleon III, defeated Austria at the Battle of Solferino, leading to the loss of Lombardy. This defeat marked the beginning of the end for Austrian control over Italy, and in 1866, Austria was forced to cede Venetia to Italy after another military defeat. The loss of Lombardy and Venetia was a significant blow to the Habsburg monarchy, both in terms of prestige and territorial control. More importantly, it signaled the growing weakness of Austria's hold on its empire. As Italian unification progressed, Austria's position in Europe became increasingly precarious. The Habsburgs were now facing not only internal unrest but also the rise of rival powers, particularly Prussia, which was beginning to challenge Austria's dominance within the German Confederation. Nationalism was also gaining strength among the Slavic populations of the empire. In regions like Bohemia, Moravia, and Galicia, Czech, Slovak, and Polish nationalists were calling for greater autonomy and recognition of their cultural and linguistic identities. The Austrian government, fearful of the empire's disintegration, responded with even more repression, seeking to stifle these nationalist movements before they could pose a serious threat. However, Austria's attempts to suppress Slavic nationalism only served to radicalize these groups further. By the mid-19th century, it was clear that Austria's multi-ethnic empire was becoming increasingly difficult to govern. The rise of Prussia as a dominant power in Central Europe added another layer of complexity to Austria's struggles. Throughout the 1860s, Prussia, under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, was positioning itself as the leading German power, challenging Austria's traditional dominance within the German Confederation. Bismarck, a master of realpolitik, understood that Austria's multi-ethnic empire was a weakness rather than a strength, and he sought to exploit these internal divisions to his advantage. The culmination of Austria's rivalry with Prussia came in 1866, with the outbreak of the Austro-Prussian War. The conflict was brief but decisive. Austria, weakened by its internal struggles and its loss of Italian territories, was no match for the modernized and efficient Prussian military. The Battle of Königgrätz, fought on July 3, 1866, was a crushing defeat for Austria, leading to its expulsion from the German Confederation. This defeat marked the end of Austria's role as the leading German power and cemented Prussia's dominance in Central Europe. The consequences of Austria's defeat in the Austro-Prussian War were far-reaching. Not only did it lose its influence within the German states, but it also exposed the deep structural weaknesses within the Habsburg monarchy. Austria's multi-ethnic empire was increasingly ungovernable, and the rise of nationalism posed an existential threat to Habsburg rule. In the aftermath of the war, Austria was forced to come to terms with the reality that it could no longer govern its empire through brute force alone. The suppression of revolutionary movements and the denial of nationalist aspirations had only deepened the divisions within the empire. Recognizing the need for change, Austria sought to implement a series of reforms aimed at placating its restive subjects. The most significant of these reforms came in 1867, with the establishment of the Austro-Hungarian Compromise, also known as the Ausgleich. This agreement transformed the Austrian Empire into the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary, granting Hungary significant autonomy while maintaining the Habsburg dynasty's overall control. The Ausgleich was a pragmatic solution to the growing demands for Hungarian independence, but it did little to address the other nationalist movements within the empire. While the Ausgleich temporarily stabilized relations between Austria and Hungary, it did nothing to ease tensions among the empire's other subject peoples. Slavic nationalists, in particular, were deeply dissatisfied with the arrangement, viewing it as a betrayal of their own aspirations for autonomy. The dual monarchy was seen as favoring the interests of Germans and Hungarians at the expense of the empire's Slavic populations. In the decades that followed, Austria's attempts to maintain control over its diverse empire would become increasingly fraught with difficulty. The Habsburg monarchy, which had once ruled over much of Central Europe with an iron fist, was now struggling to hold its empire together in the face of rising nationalist movements, external pressures, and internal divisions. As we move into the third and final part of this exploration of Austria's opposition to revolutionary movements, we will examine how the dual monarchy's repressive tactics continued to shape the fate of the empire in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. We will also explore how Austria's role in the broader European geopolitical landscape ultimately led to its involvement in World War I, setting the stage for the collapse of the Habsburg monarchy.